Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Biographical Encyclopedia, Volume 1, and this article is entitled Rich, Charles Coulson. Charles C. Rich is one of the least known apostles, and as such, it's one that I did some research on. So I do happen to know a little bit about him. What I associate him most strongly with, a couple things, but one of the big ones is that he was involved in the Battle of Crooked River. He was kind of like second in command under David W. Patton, but David W. Patton was killed during the battle, and so Charles C. Rich basically had to pick up where he left off. He didn't have time to take care of David Patton. He had to continue the battle until it was finished. And just in case you were wondering, what they were doing was they were trying to free people who had been kidnapped. Like the Missouri mob had kidnapped a handful of saints and were holding them hostage, and they were trying to forcibly get them to release the hostages. So that's what the Battle of Crooked River was about. Not that many people died. I think it was 4 or 5 total. But one of them was David W. Patton. Charles C. Rich was the one who picked up the sword, so to speak, and continued to lead the people despite just seeing, one of the apostles die right in front of him. And Charles C. Rich was not an apostle at the time. And so just keep that in mind. He was called much later under Brigham Young, because we have moved on into the people called by Brigham Young. With our video last week, Ezra T. Benson being the first one. So, yeah, Charles C. Rich. I also connect him with the north of Utah, which I think most people would, with places named after him, like Richfield, I think it is, that's named after him. So northern Utah is where he settled. But he did a bunch of other things too. So let's get into the article and we can look at all of the cool things he did. So Rich, Charles Coulson, a member of the Council of 12 Apostles from 1849 to 1883, was the son of Joseph Rich and Nancy O'Neill, and was born August 21st, 1809 in Campbell County, Kentucky. He was baptized by Ira M. Hinckley in Tazewell County, and I believe he was the grandfather of Gordon B. Hinckley. I think that's right. April 1st, 1832. So look at how far back that goes. And ordained an elder in Fountain County, Indiana by Zebedee Coltrane, while en route to Kirtland to see Prophet Joseph. He received his endowments in the Kirtland Temple and was ordained a high priest under the hands of Patriarch Hiram Smith at Kirtland. He moved with his father to Far West, Missouri in 1836 and was married to Sarah D. P. February 11, 1837, near Caldwell County, Missouri, by George M. Hinkle. Brother Rich took a prominent part with the saints in all the persecutions of Missouri. While carrying a flag of truce between the camp of the saints and the mobocrats of Far West, he was shot at about 10 yards distant by Samuel Bogart, a Methodist preacher and a mob officer. Yeah, well, a lot of people were. So, when we talk about Far West, the reason why they're so up in arms about it at the time was because they were treated really badly. And while there were some people who were like, no, I don't want the mobs to interfere with us anymore, and they were trying to stand up for themselves, yeah, there was that faction, but dude, considering how they were treated, do you really blame them? And then, things like this happened all the time. Carrying a flag of truce, he was shot. Seriously? Who does that? Apparently, Samuel Bogart. Or Bogart, whatever you pronounce it. At the Battle of Crooked River, yeah, I mentioned that, when David W. Patton fell mortally wounded, and while bullets were flying thick and fast, he laid down his sword in the heat of the battle and administered the ordinance of laying on of hands to the dying hero, after which he resumed the sword, assumed command, and the Battle of Crooked River was won by the saints. Well, sort of. I don't know. I guess they did free the kidnapped people, so I guess that, in that sense it was won the battle, lost the war, Because of the prominent part he took in the Missouri Troubles, he was forced to flee for his life through the wilderness into Illinois. Yeah, some people did, because especially people who were very prominent in the Battle of Crooked River. They had to leave the state. So, he was ordained a member of the High Council in Nauvoo and was also a member of the City Council. He left Nauvoo. That's interesting. They basically skipped that over. He fled into Illinois, but the Saints weren't there at the time. He was kind of hanging out by himself. But then, not by himself. He was probably with some other people. But, Nauvoo wasn't a city yet. It became a city, a year or two later. So it's interesting that they just, jumped straight to Nauvoo. He was ordained a member of the High Council in Nauvoo and was also a member of the City Council. He left Nauvoo February 13th, 1846, and presided over Mount Pisgah branch the following winter. I'm not sure where that is. I'll look that up. Left Pisgah March 20th, 1847 for winter quarters. Starting for the Great Salt Lake Valley June 14th, 1847, in charge of a company of moving saints. Okay, so he was one of the ones who led the groups of people coming to Salt Lake after they had chosen the site. He arrived in Great Salt Lake Valley October 3rd, 1847. During the absence of the 12 on their return to winter quarters, he acted in the valley as counselor to Father John Smith, who was left to preside over the colony. That's interesting. We talked about the fact that John Smith, the uncle of the prophet, with also presiding patriarch, was in charge of the whole area, Salt Lake Valley, at the time. So apparently his first counselor was Charles C. Rich. Well, no, first counselor, it says counselor. So he had Charles C. Rich as a counselor. So that's cool that kind of converged right there, those two stories. Elder Rich was ordained a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles by Brigham Young, February 12th, 1849, and started on a mission to California on the 9th of the following October, returning home November 4th, 1850. He again started for California March 6, 1851, with a portion of his family and a company of saints by the southern route to purchase a place for the location of the saints might be gathered from the islands of the Pacific. Yeah, San Bernardino, yeah. With Elder Amasa M. Lyman in September 1851, he purchased the rancho of San Bernardino, containing about 100,000 acres for the sum of $77,500, to which place the company removed and began the foundation and settlement of what is now one of the richest and finest countries in Southern California. I think they mean counties, yes? Not sure. When the Buchanan War broke out, the rancho of San Bernardino was sold, and the Saints returned to Utah. Buchanan War, I think that's what they mean is the Utah War, yeah? That's when the Army marched into Utah and kind of were like, you're starting an insurrection, we're here to quell the, problems. Anyway, and that was not so fun. They ended up burying a whole bunch of their stuff and, fun times, yeah. Brother Rich, leaving there April 16th, 1857, arrived in Salt Lake City in June of the same year. He accompanied General Daniel H. Wells to Echo Canyon and Fort Bridger during the Buchanan War, rendering valuable counsel and aid. Remember, he was part of the militia in Missouri, so he knew what he was doing, kind of military-ish, if you will. I mean, militias are, a less formal military with less funding. That's about it. In 1860, he was called on a mission to England, and for the time was associated with Elder Amasa M. Lyman in the presidency of the European Mission. Okay, I'm not sure why they worded it like that, but yeah, okay. He returned home in 1862, and in the autumn of 1863, he explored Bear Lake Valley and moved his family there the following spring. That's in Idaho. He was a natural pioneer and was the leader of the original settlers of that valley, where he resided until his death, continuing to be the main director in the establishment of towns and settlements in that region. Rich County, the extreme northern county of Utah, was named in honor of him. Yeah. During the early years of the Bear Lake settlements, the only means by which the residents could get their mails from or have any communication with the valleys farther south when the snow was deep in the mountains was by crossing on snowshoes. when others would shrink from the dangerous undertaking of traversing the mountains at such seasons. When terrific storms prevailed, Brother Rich would set out, just to get the mail. Can you believe that? Like, how difficult it was at the time to communicate with each other. But, I mean, it's so important. Communication with the main body and, like, with your loved ones, it's so important. And he was willing to trek on snowshoes to get the mail. You know, it's so interesting. His wonderful strength and great powers of endurance, of which he had never seemed to know the limit, and his almost intuitive knowledge of the country, always enabled him to go through, though in doing so he sometimes bore fatigue enough to kill an ordinary man. See, well, I don't know why they say that. Like, maybe to kill some men, maybe, but like, an ordinary man is I don't know, it's a weird way of saying that. He made many of these hazardous journeys over the mountains. Indeed, for a number of years, that was his usual mode of traveling when going to Salt Lake City, or attend the session of the legislature, or returning from the same. In the early days of the church, Elder Rich figured conspicuously as a military man, and was distinguished for his coolness and bravery. He held the office of Major General in the Nauvoo Legion, and was in many familiarly called General Rich up to the day of his death. When an attempt was made to kidnap the prophet Joseph Smith in 1843 and take him to Missouri, Brother Rich, at the head of 25 men, started out from Nauvoo to render him assistance, and returned after having traveled about 500 miles on horseback in 7 days. See, I don't travel on horseback, so I don't really have an idea of how difficult that would have been, but it sounds hard, yeah. In the political affairs of Utah, he served several terms as a member of the council and house in the territorial legislature. Throughout his lifetime, he was less noted for his brilliant talents than for his real goodness. He was a man of generous impulses, and seemed to live for the happiness of others rather than his own. Cheerful, honest, industrious, benevolent, extending substantial sympathy to those in need, and giving fatherly counsel to, and setting a worthy example before all around him, he moved on through life, honored and beloved by all who knew him. He was stricken with paralysis October 24, 1880, and died at his home in Paris, Bear Lake County, Idaho, November 17, 1883. During all these 3 years of affliction, he was never heard to complain or in any manner evince anything but a spirit of the utmost contentment and resignation. See also Southern Star, Volume 2, page 385. Now, So stricken with paralysis, obviously that doesn't just happen. I'm pretty sure he had a stroke, which would make sense for him being quote-unquote stricken with paralysis. But it probably paralyzed half of his body. That does happen, and it's very unfortunate when it does. Strokes suck. But yeah. Anyway, so there were a couple things I forgot about originally, but obviously you just read about some of them. But let's take a look at my article, and I don't want to use Wikipedia today because we don't have to. Yeah, I've already done the research. So let's go ahead and take a look. So first of all, I always pick out a scripture that I feel like belongs, relates to this person. So Charles C. Rich. And that scripture is Doctrine and Covenants 98:22. If ye observe to do whatsoever I command you, I, the Lord, will turn away all wrath and indignation from you. And he was ordained 12th of February 1849 at age 39 by Brigham Young. So, biography. Charles Coulson Rich was born 21 August 1809 in Boone County, Kentucky, to Joseph Rich and Nancy O'Neill. Little is known about his early life. What is known is that Charles was baptized at age 23 by Ira N. Hinckley in Tazewell County, Illinois, 1 April 1832. Evidence also suggests that his whole family joined the church around the time of his baptism. Of his conversion, Elder Rich said this: I studied carefully, anxiously, and prayerfully that I might know if it were the Church of Jesus Christ. I did not want to run any risk in the matter and remain in uncertainty. I was willing to do anything that would give me a knowledge of the truth. I was willing to receive it through the ministration of an angel, through direct revelation, or by any other way, but I did not want to be deceived. Every time I reflected carefully upon the subject, I came to this point. The conditions upon which the promises have been made are, repentance, baptism, and imposition of hands. The Spirit would then whisper, "You have not been baptized. You have not obeyed the gospel. But when I had complied with the law, then I had a perfect claim to the blessings and the promises, and did receive them, and obtained a perfect knowledge of the truth, and could then bear testimony of it to all the world." Volume 19, 1877, February 10th, 1878. Journal of Discourses. Yeah, that's what that's about. Okay. Immediately following his baptism, Brother Rich left for Kirtland, Ohio, to meet the prophet and join the saints. Brother Rich then served a mission to his native Kentucky, after which he was part of Zion's camp. See, they didn't mention that in the article. Following his return from Zion's camp, he and his father traveled to Caldwell County, Missouri, and bought land there. Charles's occupations were varied, as were many of those who lived at that time. He engaged in farming, hunting, and various woodworking activities. Charles Rich was ordained a high priest in August 1837 by Hiram Smith. His home became the center of church activity in that area of Caldwell County. On 2 November 1838, Charles married his first wife, Sarah D. Armand P., at Far West, Missouri. She became the mother of 9 of his children. Brother Rich was second in command at the Battle of Crooked River. He witnessed David W. Patton's mortal wound and paused in his battle efforts to administer to Elder Patton. Immediately following his ministrations, he picked up his sword and continued to lead the battle. Later, while leading a group of LDS troops under a flag of truce, Brother Rich was fired upon at close range by Samuel Bogart, a Methodist minister. Amazingly, Brother Rich was protected by the Lord and his life was spared. Yeah, we mentioned both of those things, so we'll just keep going. Because of his prominent role in the Missouri difficulties, he was forced to flee for his life to Illinois. During his absence, his wife, Sarah, pregnant with their first child, took 7 displaced families into her home. It's incredible. Sarah Rich, together with her friend Samantha Stout, vowed to be reunited with their husbands. They left Far West in January, reaching the Mississippi River across from Quincy when it was frozen with chunks of ice. It was impossible to cross with their wagons. Their husbands, hearing of their recent arrival, acquired a small boat and braved the ice to reach them. The next morning, they decided it would be best to bring Sarah and the 2 other women to the Illinois side. They were forced by lack of space to leave Sarah's father to wait for the ferry. On the return journey, huge blocks of ice threatened to crush the small canoe. The men occasionally jumped onto the ice to push the boat out of danger. Sarah's father watched from the shore with tear-filled eyes. Miraculously, they made it safely to shore, and Sarah gave birth to her first child, Sarah Jane, in Nauvoo on 4th of March, 1839. So, well, that wasn't immediately then. It was because they said they got there in January. So, it was a couple months later, but still. Yeah. She was heavily pregnant, and they wanted to make sure that she was in a safe place, as they didn't know how long it would take for the Mississippi to thaw out completely so that it would be passable. Yeah. Remember, there were no bridges then. Bridges are really hard to build. It takes forever. So, there weren't any. They used ferries to cross the Mississippi, which is a very dangerous river. Yeah. Brother Rich was known as Major General Rich in the Nauvoo Legion, and was referred to as General Rich up to the day of his death. He even led a group of the Nauvoo Legion to be of assistance to Joseph Smith in 1843, traveling some 500 miles on horseback in 7 days. After Joseph Smith's death, but before leaving Nauvoo, Charles married 4 more times. Eliza Ann Graves and Mary Ann Phelps in January of 1845, Sarah Jane Peck in January 1847, and Emmeline Grover in February 1846. He also married Harriet Sargent in winter quarters in March 1847. He was obviously one of those few requested to practice plural marriage at the time. Brother Rich participated in the Exodus West, reaching Utah with his aged parents in 1847. His mother died 2 days after their arrival in Salt Lake Valley, her greatest wish of seeing the resting place of the saints having been fulfilled. About the settlement of Utah, Elder Rich said this: "For this purpose we immigrated to these valleys, that we may live our religion, obey the precepts of the gospel, and do as we should do in every day we live." Volume 4, 1857, June 14, 1857. Shortly after arriving in Utah, Brother Rich was called as counselor to President John Smith in the first stake of Zion in the Great Salt Lake Valley. He was also quite active in the militia there. Not surprising considering his background. Less than 2 years later, Charles C. Rich was called to be a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles by President Brigham Young in February of 1849, together with Lorenzo Snow, Erastus Snow, and Franklin D. Richards. This is the only time that they had called 4 at a time, besides the original 12, of course. And so when, a couple of years ago, when they called 3 apostles at once, somebody said it's unprecedented. It's not. It's not. Like, there was these 4, and then there was another time when there were 4 as well. So there were a total of 3 times that were, a lot of people called at the same time. So, yeah, this one was not completely unprecedented, but it was, well, at this time it was. This was the first time that 4 were called at once, besides the original 12. So, it was Charles C. Rich, Lorenzo Snow, Erastus Snow, and Franklin D. Richards. The new apostles were called to fill the vacant seats caused by the formation of the First Presidency and the apostasy of Lyman Wight. That same year, Elder Rich was asked to lead a group of colonists across the desert to settle in California. They were joined on their journey by a group of gold diggers led by Captain John Smith. Captain Smith persuaded Elder Rich to take a shortcut that was supposed to save them days of travel. The group soon began to suffer from lack of water. Elder Rich felt impressed to return to the established route, even though it would take them longer. The colonists followed the inspired direction of Apostle Rich, and all later arrived at their destination in safety. The group of gold diggers tried to keep going and nearly starved to death before eventually turning back. Yeah, listen to the experts, I'm telling you. Together with Elder Amasa M. Lyman, Elder Rich sought to find a place for the saints to settle. This task proved more expensive than anticipated. The only place they could find was a ranch in San Bernardino, and they decided to purchase 100,000 acres of it for the price of $77,500. Elder Rich was made mission president of California, and the settlement thrived. The colony served as a base of supplies and a receiving station near a Pacific port for the immigrants from the Pacific Isles. The colony grew to some 7,000 before being disbanded. Leading the colonists was certainly no easy task. Elder Rich told this story of his time as mission president. Some years ago, when I was presiding in California, I had been away for a short time, and on my return I found a large crowd on the water's edge, some of whom were being baptized. I think Brother Hopkins was there, and I asked him subsequently what induced the people to turn out so suddenly. He replied that some sister had received a revelation the night before, commanding them to be baptized. I told him that if any revelation had been given on this subject, I should have known it. Volume 19, 1877, November 11th, 1877. So, yeah, he's not wrong. You don't just receive revelation for things that aren't under your purview, Being a firm believer in revelation coming through proper channels of authority, Elder Rich immediately corrected the colonists under his stewardship. When the Utah War broke out, President Brigham Young called the saints in all the colonies to return to Utah to strengthen the militia there, should their services be required. The San Bernardino Ranch was sold, and most of the colonists returned to Utah, although some determined to stay in California. Elder Rich left in April of 1857 and arrived in Salt Lake in June. He then accompanied General Daniel H. Wells to Echo Canyon and Fort Bridger to counsel the saints and render aid. After the settlement of the conflict, Elder Rich remained with his family in Utah. In 1860, he was called on a mission to England and assisted Elder Amasa M. Lyman, this time in the presidency of the European Mission. So it's the second time they worked together, yeah? He returned home in 1862. Very little is documented of his mission. However, in a conference address following his return to Utah, Elder Rich said this, referring to his missionary service. I feel great pleasure in meeting with the brethren and sisters, having just returned from a mission. I do not speak of this because of a feeling that I am now relieved from a mission, for I feel that I have been on a mission all the time, and I expect to remain a missionary from this time henceforth and forever. This is the height of my ambition, that I may have the pleasure of laboring to build up the kingdom of God on the earth. Volume 10, 1862, October 6, 1862. In the fall of 1863, he was called to explore Bear Lake Valley in Idaho, this being what would turn out to be his final calling. His family joined him there in the following spring. Often, Elder Rich was the only one willing to trudge through the snow to collect the mail for the Bear Lake area. Being a strong man with an extensive knowledge of the country, he often endured fatigue that would have killed a smaller, weaker, or less knowledgeable man. He was also known to cross the mountains on snowshoes to attend General Conference. Elder Rich was content with his calling to Bear Lake Valley. I felt that it was right that I should come here, not because I could live here better than any other place, but because this was my place and field of labor. And there is one good thing we should all learn, that is, always to be contented where the Lord has placed us. Volume 19, 1877, February 10, 1878. In one of his last talks, Elder Rich admitted that he felt of myself very weak, and I desire the prayers of the saints that I may be able to instruct you, showing his increasing physical weakness. Volume 19, 1877, February 10, 1878. Elder Rich was struck with paralysis following a stroke on 24 October 1880, and was subsequently confined to his home. He died there firm in the faith on 17 November 1883, over 3 years later, at age 74. He was never heard to complain of his illness. Elder Rich was survived by 37 of his 51 children and 6 wives. He also had 85 grandchildren at the time of his death. Rich County, Utah was also named after Elder Rich. Now I have a whole bunch of quotes, and I'm actually going to completely skip over them because it would take too much time today to read all of the quotes. But I will read just the very tail end where it's about John Henry Evans was his biographer, and he wrote of him, Charles Coulson Rich could preach a sermon, drill an army, shoe an ox, govern a college, build factories in the wilderness and run them on a dividend-paying basis, lay plans and make laws for a great commonwealth. As missionary, he carried his religion through much of Europe and brought hundreds of converts overseas to the American Southwest. That's Charles Coulson Rich, 1936, page 584. So I really liked that. But then I also have a conclusion that I came to. You can agree or disagree with me. I don't have a problem with you not agreeing, but let me know what you think in the comments. But here's my conclusion. So what kind of a man was Charles C. Rich? Looking at his life, one can see that he was always ready to serve wherever he was called. He was called to colonize and serve missions in various places across the globe, and no matter how remote the destination, Elder Rich willingly and immediately agreed to serve in the desired capacity. It seems that one overarching theme connects the important topics of his talks. That is, obedience. He felt it of utmost importance to obey the Lord, to obey his church leaders, to obey his conscience of what he knew to be right. He was the kind of man who lived what he preached. What he said were not just empty words. If he knew it to be true, he obeyed the principle himself. Elder Rich was a generous man, one who looked out for the poor, one who helped people make sound decisions, one who relied on the Lord for direction, one who studied out gospel concepts before taking them to the Lord, such as the millennium, one who rejoiced at being alive. So, yeah. I mean, I don't really have much to add to that because I wrote the article in the first place, and I can tell because it's totally in my voice, but it's basically saying that he was a really, really good person, and he was very obedient, and he was submissive to the Lord. Yeah, he was just willing to do what was needed and to go where he was needed, and I really admire that about him. So I hope that you learned something today because I really, really love this person. I feel like he was just a very genuinely good person, and you can't say that about everyone we've talked about, that's for sure. So yeah, I just hope that you enjoyed it today, and if you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.